and welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, disaster management, crisis management, COVID, anything that's relatable to those subjects, and anything that helps you, your organization, or your community plan for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. Longtime listeners, you will know that I talked a lot about Business Continuity Institute. I've talked about the Teams organization. And sometimes I'm lucky enough to get some of those people who will come on the show and talk about, different subjects. And today I'm lucky enough to have somebody from the International Emergency Management Society, or at least that's how I came in contact with today's guest, I should say. And she's recently received her certification, her Teams certification. So congratulations to my guest. But I'd like
Thank
to
you.
get to my guest a lot sooner. We're going to talk about disaster management and project management and how the two work together. And I'd like to welcome to the show from Australia today, Desiree Beekharry. Desiree, welcome.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you very much for having me on your show and introducing me to your listeners around the world. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
It's great to have you. I know you and I chatted, I guess it would be about a month ago, or maybe about an upcoming newsletter I've been putting together for teams about certification. And you and I had a
Yes,
chat and shared some thoughts. And that's when I thought, hey, would you be interested in coming on the show? And luckily, you're here today.
yes.
Now, because we do have or I'll say we have global listeners literally around the globe. Can you take a minute or two to talk about yourself? Give a brief bio and how you got to where you are today.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Firstly, let me wish your listeners a very happy new year. This is 2021. We finally crawled out to 2020. So I wish you all around the world success and prosperity and good health as we go towards something more positive. Um, I can say that my first disaster was a cyclone when I was a child. And from then, when I saw the look on people's faces post cyclone, once I saw I saw how people were affected. I saw that blank look in their eyes. I saw that lost look in their eyes. I saw that that feeling of emptiness that they had looking around the devastations that's around them. And somehow I feel it marked me. I didn't realize to what point it had marked me. And I feel that flying over Australia when I migrated here from Europe, um, that's when they had the 2008 bushfire. Um, Once again, I had that feeling in my heart. I was in a plane and I looked down, it was all black everywhere. And I thought to myself, how do people recover from that? How do you get over that? Because I was lucky enough, having been in a cyclone, a class 5 cyclone, to have been protected from it. And being a child, I saw what I saw, but now as an adult, I saw that and I thought, oh my God, how does one recover for that? What do you do? And I think it's those kinds of things that, those experiences that did something to me. And in my heart and in my previous life, I have been project managing, and I guess as women, we're permanently, if you're running a home and things, you're project managing, but you don't call it that, you just manage a home. But I realized that I have been project managing from a perspective of events, travel, etc. So the difference between project management and event management is that while you do have the same steps, you have a deadline date that is normally unmovable, except of course in the year of COVID where everything got moved. So, but in event management, you have that drop dead date. Most of the time, depending who you work with, you have the political deadlines, etc. Can't move it, so you move heaven and earth to meet it. Project management, of course, you're working from the front to the end, and it's a little bit different. but pretty much all the steps are the same. And I've seen both, and I've been lucky enough to be part of um, the emergency management sector in Australia. That's really where I've really delved into it, and I've fallen in love with it. I did my master's thesis in risk and emergency management, and I absolutely adore risk. And I've gone
Now there's
further.
something you don't hear every day.
What's that? That I
There's
love
something you don't
risk.
hear every day. I adore risk.
Yeah. Well, it's the fact that it's the idea of asking the what if question all the time, because we do it. You spend
Mhm.
money, you buy a car, you're permanently assessing risk in everyday life. We just don't call it that, or you don't see it as that, but you're doing, you book a holiday. Well, what if a flight gets cancelled? What do you not ask that? You get insurance. So we're doing it, maybe on a smaller scale, or depending on how big a holiday you're taking. But it is great asking the what if questions. It it creates it brings out creativity, because when you come up against a wall, you want to try and go around it, and that's where that creativity comes out. And not only do you see the issues, but you also see the benefits of having to find ways. And then you think, oh, I could have done this like this all this time. So it's not all negative when you look at risk. I like the idea that the opportunities that it can create. So, but anyway, all in that to say that here I am I now work at the Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC, Cooperative Research Centre. We do high level research to um, protect and make and help the Australian community more resilient to natural hazards, because we cannot stop the hazard from happening, a disaster from happening. What we can do is prepare people and make sure that the impact, the consequences of these disasters are better managed and people are more prepared. So that's where I am at the moment when it comes to job.
Well, I know I've mentioned before on the show that for anyone who may not know, I've been working in business continuity, crisis management, et cetera, for 22 years now or more. And I also have another career path, and it's project management. So I'm really
Yes.
looking forward to talking with you today. Now, on the topic of project management and disaster management, and you already brought it up, some of the natural disasters. Some of the information that we've exchanged, you had an interesting 5 points definition of what a natural disaster is and what some of those post disaster projects occur. And some of those projects, I got to tell you, in your notes you gave me, it says, some of these slides may not be, you know, um, happy slides, let's just say. And some of
Mm.
these projects you have to consider really different.
Yes, Alex, they are, sadly, and this is the reality of disasters. And you mentioned that there are many ways to define what a disaster is. It's it's when a hazard, and we all know that a hazard will cause damage of some kind. It's when you have a hazard, but it happens, and then it disrupts everything we know around us, our social network. It causes you have to do unplanned actions, and there are so many things that changes when a disaster hits, that you are left with having to deal with what happens afterwards, because anything you may have planned is about what you've planned, but what we plan is not always, one is not always able to put this plan in action, simply because you had no control over what the disaster can cause. So it's great to have a plan. It's always good to have a backup plan of the plan. But it's a disaster can be, you need to be very ready to adapt your plan. It's good to have a course of action, but have that idea of flexibility or adaptability, especially when you're dealing with disasters, because not everything goes to plan. Because when you're planning, you're in one place and you're assuming, all your dominoes are, or your, you know,
Right.
all your little bits are in their place where you've put them. But on the day of a disaster and while it's happening, your dominoes might not be in that place. They may be scattered. They may be in different places. So what do you do when they're all scattered and all there is you? You can't do everything. You do know what the plan is, but now you have to adapt. So it's a question that it's that adaptive capacity that
Hmm.
that interests me the most. And then you touched on the post disaster, the kind of projects. Well, you know, the reality of disaster is that it kills. It is fatal for people depending on how big it is. So you do have deaths, you do have destruction, you do have injuries. And when you look at projects, and as you said, some of them are quite, people can, it's upset sensitivities, but that's the important part. Because if you consider, um, um, if you consider the impacts of the Indian Ocean tsunami or the Japanese tsunami, these are the two biggest ones that probably stays in our mind in the most recent times. Imagine the kind of death toll that came up. Well, you have corpses, unfortunately, literally everywhere, where some group, some department has to clean that up, and that's done through projects. You have homes, that are smashed to pieces. Some group has to clean that up. If there's an earthquake or destruction of roads, buildings, etc., we know what earthquakes can cause. Someone has to go in there and clean up, um, not only the actual concrete and the debris, but someone again has to go and clean and take care of the dead. So these are very delicate things to do, but they're still projects, and there are timelines to do that in. There are ways of doing that, and there's a certain organization. So it is, post disasters, there are so many aspects that people don't really consider, how important, the how much work is being done, and the kind of uh, capabilities that are required, and the organizations, because there's also the idea that the area is flooded with people who are managing all these different sectors. And
Hmm.
it's a question, how do you organize that? So you've got the people who are doing their single individual work. So you've got the people cleaning up, removing debris, taking care of cadavers, and making sure people have shelters, and making sure that they have water and all those things. But at the same time, on top of that, who's organizing these people? And if you imagine that there's also, naturally, after a disaster, you've got this major mass, influx of media, like ants. They just flood the place, and then you've got all these hotels, you've got food and stuff. So who manages that? So if you imagine a place is devastated, and they have minimal, materials to be dealing with. You're thinking of food, shelter, and everything. Everything is broken. Yet you have a whole bunch of people coming and asking for exactly that: shelter, food, this, that, the other, plus the people who are there to actually help. So it's a great big mess and projects, and it's really unimaginable of what happens post disaster. And don't forget, you've got a whole bunch of people, which is that affected community, who are feeling at that particular time incredibly lost. They are confused, they are upset, they are sad, they're distraught, they are heartbroken. They've lost people, or they're lost, or their people are literally lost somewhere. They don't know if they're alive or dead. And you've got this emotional surge that's all around everyone. So all of that it's something to consider, and can be quite traumatic, and you're expected to manage projects and help people in that. So it's all of that that happens post disaster that we have to consider. And I play a very tiny little role trying to make that a little bit better. That's what I feel I should do.
Desiree, can you clarify something for me? Can you define disaster management? And that may sound like a silly question, but I've actually run into people, and there's probably people listening or watching right now who think, oh, well, a sprinkler went off in the office or my mainframe broke. That's a disaster. So that's disaster management. But it's not. Can you clarify what that is?
Yes, of course, I. I think when I guess it's when you're talking about disaster, it's a question of scale as well. And for this organization that needs to fix their mainframe, this is their world, and it is a disaster for them. It's not a disaster for the rest of the world or for their community or perhaps for their location, for their country. And yeah, it is a question of scale. When I'm talking about natural hazards and a natural disaster, we're talking about the ones like a fire, a tsunami, a flood. So these weather events that can, and climatic events and earthquakes that can destroy communities and roads and infrastructure and all of what socioeconomic environment that was in place that was stable before that came through. And the idea of disaster management is the coming together of professionals who work in in organizations such as fire, um, the ambulance, police, the SES here, who look after floods and all sorts of things, emergency services, and it's about a whole bunch of organizations that come together to do their best to restabilize people, to save lives. That's more response, but saving lives is ongoing. You could be injured, so you could go one way or another. So to restabilize the people, the community, the social, economic well-being of a place, a country, or right now with COVID, it's the world. This is what disaster management is. It's the not the building back better or putting back better, but bringing the people back to a smoother recovery so that they can move on with their lives, find their, depending on what has impacted them, it won't be the same again. You can never have everything the same again,
Mm,
but they
yeah.
can find that stability again, with the losses they've suffered, with the trauma they've suffered, and move forward in a healthier way post that disaster. So that's what disaster management is enabling a group of people, whether it's the survivors or the emergency management sector themselves, to actually move forward and assist people and assist themselves to get past the disaster. That's what disaster management is. And there are a lot of each government has policies in place or should have policies in place that are that are triggered when a disaster strikes, and then that sets off a series of things, emotions that creates and lets loose all the people who need to be let loose so that they are able to help the people. The people are the main object, because we need to make sure conservation of life is the ultimate, but life cannot happen without clean water. Life cannot happen without food. Life cannot happen without streets being available, so that the
And
food
that
can
would
come.
be some of those projects, right?
Exactly. So when you look at disaster management, it's all this chain reaction that happens. So you want to preserve life, you want to give people shelter. All of this is part of it, but at the same time, they all have a knock-on effect. One cannot happen without the other, because as you also, you might or may not know, but nowadays we live in kind of a systems. We're looking at a network where you do one thing, it will impact something else.
Mm, yeah.
there are no autonomous systems anymore. It's all very interdependable. So if you have a mobile phone, you need to have internet. You can't just have a phone without internet because, well, who can have a phone without internet now? It's almost like you can't have a computer that's just a computer that you can just type word processing or just type letters in it. You need to have it linked to internet. So nothing is standalone anymore. So you have to look at everything in disaster management in the same way.
Can you take a minute or two and just describe PPRR, which is related
Yes,
to disaster
well,
management?
that's right. So the PPRR is part of the disaster management framework. It's prevention, which is also known as mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So when you're looking at prevention and preparedness, which is prevention is to stop the impact. Prevention is not stopping the hazard from occurring. Let's remember that, because this is well out of our control. No matter how big we think we are, we can't control a hazard from taking place. What we can do is we can prevent something from happening and impacting us by putting in a certain amount of regulations, for example, building codes, legislation, public education and information to inform people what to do so that if, let's take the example of a tsunami, if they've now, in most places where tsunamis are, if you want to call it common, there are loudspeakers all around the routes and everything. And as soon as there's a warning, then the alarm will sound. People know to drop everything, leave the beach, leave anything that's within a certain kilometers, go up to the hills, go up and away. So, that's what prevention is. So it helps you to get away from the impact of that hazard. Preparedness are things like emergency response plans, warning systems, as I mentioned in regards to the tsunami, communications, agreements between organizations for mutual aid, for example. What more? Education, again, public education, shelters, making sure there are shelters already in place in different places, whether if it's a bushfire shelter or if it's flood shelter, making sure that these things are in place. Response, of course, we all know about response. That's the blue light, flashing blue lights that come in and save us. So responders come in and do what they need to do immediately, but they have no preparation for the before. So that's where the prevention and preparedness comes in, and they don't have anything to do with after. So response is basically coming in, putting out the fire, and then packing up and go. And I don't mean to make it sound like that's very basic. It's a very dangerous job, especially when you consider people who have to go, into swiftwater rescue or firefighters. Anyone who needs to go into anywhere that's highly dangerous to save a life. I don't mean to simplify it, but that's a very specific area for response. And response has has a duration of whatever it is, long enough to stop the fire, long enough to rescue the person who's drowning, long enough to save lives, long enough to do those things. That's what response does. Afterwards, just as soon as response is underway and people are being saved, recovery begins almost simultaneously. And recovery is everything that happens after the disaster. So recovery could be, of course, recovery is mental health recovery, physical recovery, recovery of buildings, renovation, reconstruction, more public information, where to get what, moving people from shelters to more permanent accommodation, perhaps while their homes are being rebuilt, and also recovery of the economy, because depending on how big the disaster was that impacted that community, that country, then it's all about the recovery of the whole, the society that has suffered that disaster. So that's the nature of PPRR, and it's an approach to the emergency management or disaster management, as we call it. There are two ways: emergency management, disaster management. They're interchangeable, and they're used in different countries, different in the same way.
Well, you first of all, you answered a question I was going to ask about emergency management, disaster management, so I can skip that one now.
Yeah, well, the thing is, when we talk about emergency, we all think it's the 000, 911, 999. These numbers. That's an emergency, and when we talk emergencies, most people think of the response part. So, but when we're thinking of disasters, especially natural disasters, it doesn't, of course, the 000s, the 999, numbers are, of course, many people call them because they do. But you're thinking of, well, they can't stop this. They're not going to be able to put that out. This is bigger than that, So
Right.
Can think of it like that. But, some countries will call it emergency management, like FEMA in the US, federal emergency management, and it's it doesn't it's like semantics.
Yeah.
It's called
Yeah.
emergency management, disaster management, but that's what they do: disasters.
So now let's jump to, how does traditional project management and natural disaster management, because we were talking about some disasters, how do those two management approaches, how are they similar? How can one benefit the other?
Well, look, even when you're looking, except from the response, when you're looking at prevention, preparedness, and recovery, anything that you're going to plan to do, let's say you're looking at mitigating floods, for example, and I'll talk about something that most people know about. For the levee in Katrina, the levee broke, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're considering like making that levee higher and making it stronger so that won't burst and overflow again. Well, if you do it beforehand, or any kind of levee, it's a project, but it's a project for mitigation to stop for the water from overflowing and then not causing a flood. Yeah, so that's managed through a project, but it's pre-disaster and it's a mitigation project. If the levee has overflowed and there has been a disaster, you still need to, if the levee has been breached, you still need to fix it. Then it becomes a post-disaster project. All right. Okay. However, when you're thinking of project management and disaster management, when you're looking at the event pre-disaster, most materials, most resources are available pre-disaster. If you want to get cement, you want to get people, staff, you want to get wood, whatever you need, most of the time you can shop around and find it in that vicinity and in the time frame that you're looking for, because part of the project management part is to procure these things for the best price, for the best quality, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you're looking post-disaster, if you consider a country that's already just been hit pretty badly by a hazard and they are in disaster stage, it's chaos everywhere, and the roads to that area might be blocked or the whole country might be affected. You don't have the choice to pick who your human resources are. You don't have the choice to find the wood that you want or the cement that you want or the trade that you want, because either they are too busy trying to fix their own people, their own home. They may be affected physically or mentally. They so the surrounding is in chaos. So to get yourself a group of people who are able to do that, most of the time they're not there. You have to bring them in, and that takes time. And this is also a project, but your resources are limited and you are fighting for resources, because everybody needs human resources. I mean, everyone needs a tradesperson, everyone needs a carpenter, everyone needs a plumber, everyone needs a cook, everyone needs a chef, everyone needs everyone. So these people, you don't have this huge choice then, because it's limited, and there is a fight for resources, and you need to act quickly, you need to adapt. How do you get those resources to to fix all of the stuff that you need to fix? And how do and it's a question of prioritizing. So while you're still applying the same project management principles, you have to make decisions that might be a bit contrary to what you would do. For example, you can get wood way cheaper, but not today, not this month, and not if you want to fix this right now to stop this from, going beyond. So then you pay the top dollar for it. It comes from somewhere, the quality is shoddy, but you have no choice. So it's those decisions that you have to make. So that's where you need to be more adaptable post-disaster, because you're asked a lot to do a lot with very little.
And I know where you're going. You're going to the agile approach, and I want to save that for our last segment, because you're
okay.
heading right there.
Yes, well, this is the idea, though, because when you're looking at a traditional project management, let's say pre-disaster, you've got your resources are allocated in advance. You have a lot of upfront planning that's done. You have you can learn from other projects. What did they do in this situation? So you've got the time. You look at performance indicators. You've done a risk assessment. You've done your stakeholder planning. You're doing all of those things that you'd normally do, and you've got a clinical approach to how you will manage this project. And whenever you have changes coming up, then you go through a process. You need more money, or you need to move around the money because this is costing less. So you've got all this time, all these negotiations to do, and you've got time. Post-disaster, another story, because you've got no resources are allocated until the disaster strikes. So because what's the point of allocating disaster when they probably won't be around anyway? You cannot plan anything in advance. You can have an emergency plan on where to go, what to do, and things like that, but not about resources and who's going to fix things. You cannot do that. You cannot share lessons, because even when you're thinking of the aid organizations that come in to do the projects, they are never the same people from one disaster to another. So you will never have the same team working together. So any lessons they may have learned from a previous disaster, when the new team comes up to this country and they say, we have this experience, they don't have the shared lessons as a team of project people. It's a whole new team, a whole new disaster, and it's not carried forward, if you will.
Desiree, you started to go down the road of being adaptable, and I take that as being agile project management. Can you define what that is and how being agile, I know you kind of touched on some of it, but how agile project management comes into play with disaster management?
Of course, Alex. Yeah, as you mentioned, I did touch on that about having a certain level of, a lot of adaptability when you're managing post-disaster project. Agile project management was actually developed for the IT industry, because, as you know, they needed to do a lot of iterations, one iteration of another, to make sure that things were working. And if it didn't, then they do another iterations until it did. Which I felt that, that was part of my research, that using Agile in project management was necessary because of what I explained in the previous segment, that post-disaster, you have to adapt to what there is. There's nothing in place for you. There are no resources of any kind for you. What you think was available before is no longer. So you have to think on your feet. You have to make do with what you've got, with as little as you want, and make it last longer. So there was this framework that was developed by someone called Haas in 2008, which is called the project complexity continuum, and it talks about the more predictable a project is, the less adaptable it needs to be. However, when you have a highly complex project, which is in an environment that is full of uncertainty, in an environment that is volatile, then you need to look for an adaptive way of managing your project. And agile project management is important because when you are working post-disaster and delivering projects, you are working with people in an affected community and you're delivering benefit to that community. So Agile promotes the consultation. For example, in Asia, following a disaster, a lot of aid organizations put houses. When they moved the affected community from shelters to houses, they built houses to the standards of the Western people. They didn't ask them what kind of house. Well, if you know an Asian community, you know that they don't all live in their little rooms and their little bedrooms and etc. This is a community that likes to have a nice big veranda, a nice big outdoor area, where they can share food. They do this as a community, as a whole family. That's how they live. But the homes that was built by the aid organization was not in any way fit for purpose, was not appropriate. But this is what was delivered. So a lot of people, what they do, they let them build and then they smash it down, sell the different parts, and then they'll build something eventually for what they need, because they don't need that. That's not how they live. So when we're talking post-disaster, you need to have this. Agile promotes consultation. Talk to your people, see what they need, when they need it, how they need it, and then deliver it so that it's fit for purpose. And that's the most important part of Agile, is consultation, communication, cooperate, collaborate, adapt with them and work with them. It's this whole process where you're continuously having this dialogue with the people who you'd call the end users, the stakeholders, the affected communities, but you're permanently speaking with them and you are delivering something for them, not what you put by your standards. If you've gone to help, then you help them, not help yourself by your standards. And that's what Agile does. It delivers fit for purpose. These are the words. If anything else, I think Agile it delivers fit for purpose outcomes for those who need it. And if you don't listen to those people, you don't consult and ask them what they need, then your project might be nice and shiny, but they will break it up and sell it off, and your project will be good for nothing. And you obviously want to deliver a project that's sustainable, that people are going to appreciate. So you're adding value to community, not just putting something there, said, I've done my bit. So Agile talks more to the people. And in a nutshell, this is what it is. And based on my research, I developed a framework for an Agile framework for post-disaster projects, which takes into consideration those specific features and benefits that are needed to.
What about time?
For that. Mm-hmm.
What about time? Because if it's post-disaster and you've got people that are impacted, does time have to be taken into account too? Like building homes, you got to do it I don't want to say you have to do it as fast as you can, but I think it's a situation you've got to address as fast as you can.
That's the time is a big issue, because that is an issue that is always known, because a lot of times you have NGOs, the likes of, all the big, Red Crosses of the world, who go in to help and assist and doing very great work. However, most of the aid organizations, they will go in for a certain amount of time and then they'll pull out. So they have very big ideas of what they'd like to achieve. However, projects cannot get started if the resources are not there. if they have no way of coming in because the area is cut off. So the time factor is a big issue, because often after about 6 months or whatever, the funding stops. They're moving on to the next disaster and the next helping hand they do, and it is where it stops where it stops. Sometimes you'll have some smaller organizations that are still helping, but they're working very independently, and they're all fighting. Let's remember that they are all fighting for the same scant resources. So it's a mess. There's no pretty way of explaining this. It is messy, and I think if I'm doing that, I'm not saying the framework answers all the question and is the answer, is God's gift. However, I think if you're going to manage to deliver something, deliver the right thing. Even if you don't deliver the quantity, but at least deliver the quality. And what you do deliver, make sure it's sustainable. It will stay, and people will actually use it. And that's the idea.
Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left, believe it or not. What are some of the skills that, if people are doing projects in post disasters, and are agile, what kind of skills do they need to be able to do that and be effective at it?
They needed to be able to talk and listen. I would say number one, if they can talk and they can listen, then that means they can communicate and they can advocate. No, not advocate. They can be advocates for the people, the affected communities. They listen to what is being said and what is needed, be able to talk about it and communicate that forward. And if you can do those two, then they also have big skill sets. They're not there for nothing, so they have other skill sets. But if they can do those two, they can go forward and represent the affected communities, I would say.
It's interesting. Communication is, the cornerstone of almost everything.
Yes.
And it's very surprising how many times it turns out to be, a trigger for other problems. When
That's right.
you peel things back and find out, the problem we really experienced was the communication.
That's right. Because if you don't say what you want and you don't express what you want, or you don't, it can be the make or break of everything, whether you're talking about disaster management or you're talking about marriages, simple as that. If you don't talk to those that you need to talk to, then what's there to do? So I would say, from this perspective, communicate and talk. And to say communicate is too big a word. Talk, listen, and hear what they have to say and understand what they're saying. And understanding means understand that you're in Asia, or you're in Africa, or you're in the Middle East. Wherever it is you are, do not expect their standards or their way of life to be the same as yours. So be open to that. Adapt to where you are.
Don't assume your perceptions or beliefs are the
Your
same as everybody
expectations
else's.
and what you think is important is what they think is important. So it's a question of being in the situation, in the location, and be aware of where you are, and understand it's not about you.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
We've only got a couple of minutes left. Like I said, can you take a minute and give some final thoughts on project management and disaster management?
Yes, I think that disaster managers who are expected to do, who have one specific skill, who are very specific in what they do, there needs to be more training and more of them, more opportunities for them to learn, to be able to direct and manage, and to have that freedom um, to uh, to make decisions literally on the run, and to change decisions. There needs to be policy in place so that they have that soft skill, and they are adaptable in making decisions and changing decisions without fearing repercussions of the blame that will come because they made a decision. because this was the right decision to be made at the time. It is not, again, it's not a decision that standard operating procedures would have said to do, but to have that freedom to make decisions because that was the right thing to do at the time, I would say.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our show. Desiree, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and time with us today on project management, disaster management. I really appreciate it. And it's great to chat with you a second time, of course.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. And a great new year, a great 2021 to you all.
And to you and all of your family and friends down in Australia as well. Oh, and I want to just say congratulations once again. I believe you were the first or second person to receive the International Emergency Management Global Certification. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. I don't know how I did it, but by the skin of my teeth, I succeeded. So I'm pretty happy about that.
Well, you did it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening and for everything.
And to everybody out there, like I always say, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.